thousands of Russians are protesting in cities against their domestic law, against this awful war. Will he provide them with his support? Will he amplify their support to help reduce the support, any support there is for this ridiculous war, and also provide sanction and safe haven for people, refugees, including troops who may want to re-engage, the troops outside of Ukraine, so they can re-engage, so we can win this war at home and abroad?
He makes a series of extremely important observations, and yes, I think it's vital that we get the message across to the whole of Russia about what is really going on. They're being lied to day after day, and I think that his point about supporting troops who need temporary exile, as it were, is a very good one.
Peter Bell. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for yet again coming to House to keep us informed and for his leadership in this crisis. He was right to provide military aid to Ukraine, but the Ukrainian ambassador did ask for our support in a no-fly zone today. In his answer earlier, I think the Prime Minister was keeping that option open. Is that correct?
I think it's pretty clear to the House, Mr. Speaker, that we're trying to keep all our options open on this front. Some of them, frankly, may be more practicable than others, and I think we must also have a dose of realism about what we can do on the military front. But we will keep all things under review.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many of the residents in my constituency come from a number of the countries on the eastern flank and still have relatives living there. Obviously, like us, they'll be deeply concerned about the humanitarian impact of the crisis. So, what steps is the government taking to prepare for the humanitarian issues? And with the 1,000 troops on standby to help with humanitarian assistance, will they now be deployed?
I think she raised a very important point, and what we're seeing now, tragically, is people moving west out of Kyiv. Columns of traffic, as I'm sure the House knows. People already moving into southeastern Poland. There is going to be an influx. As I said to the President of Poland, the Prime Minister of Poland as well, we're there to help.
Laura Trott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and for his strong package of sanctions. I want to ask him about preventing sexual violence in conflict. In November last year, we issued a strong statement which said that the use of sexual violence as a weapon in conflict is a red line akin to the use of chemical weapons. Will he reaffirm that commitment today, and will he send a strong message to Russia that the international community will not tolerate the use of sexual violence in conflict?
Yes, and I thank her for all the work that she's done on that issue. It's something that the UK government has campaigned on for a long time. Indeed, raised the issue very greatly in public international consciousness. I think it should be treated as a war crime like any other, and people who perpetrate sexual violence in conflict can expect to be tried in those tribunals.
John Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In seeking to redraw the boundaries of Europe through bloodshed, Putin has attacked not only the Ukraine but all of us, and we stand with the Ukraine in standing for the rule of law. I welcome the sanctions that he's announced, but I was confused by his response on Russian disinformation, which he seemed to imply would be addressed by the online safety bill. That is many, many, many months away. Russian disinformation is organized, their bots are state-sponsored. What steps will he take to address them?
I thank her. We've got and she raised a good point, but we've got, what we're doing is a massive, positive Stratcoms campaign in Russian, in Ukrainian, to make sure that people get the truth and they hear the truth.
Adam Holloway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we've noticed this afternoon, virtually everyone in this House has supported the efforts towards resistance over the last few months and in these days. I imagine the House will also support a very different sort of warfare under occupation over the coming months and possibly years. But the House will also have noticed the marvellous way the Prime Minister has spoken directly to the Russian people today. And I hope that he will bear in mind that at the moment public opinion in Russia is rather different. That does underline the importance of accurate information.
Prime Minister.
Yes. He is quite right, and I thank him. He's a distinguished former soldier, and he knows that truth is the first casualty. We have to make sure that we are telling people exactly what is going on, and to the best of my knowledge at the moment, the Ukrainians are resisting much more strongly than some people had thought that they would. Who knows how long they can keep going? Let's hope they can, and let's encourage them to do so. But Mr. Speaker, let's get the message out as well. I think that is our job.
Chris Bryant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is absolutely right. We equivocated shamelessly after Crimea. We were spineless. We must not be spineless now, because what will inevitably happen is either the Baltic states, one of the members of NATO, or perhaps Sweden or Finland will feel the wrath of Putin next. And that will mean British action. Don't we need to try and set in train now a process whereby Putin himself ends up in the dock in a court? Norman Burkitt said, who was the alternate British judge at Nuremberg, said at Nuremberg, initiating a war of aggression is not only an international crime, it is the supreme international crime, differing only from other war crimes in that it contains within itself the accumulated evil of the whole. He must be brought to a court of law and end his days in prison, mustn't he?
Mr. Speaker, I think one of the most fascinating things about what Putin is doing is how close an analogy there is between his actions and those of Slobodan Milosevic. Exactly the same nonsense being peddled about the mystical union between Kosovo and Belgrade as between Kiev and Moscow. Exactly the same aggression, and remember that Slobodan Milosevic died on trial.
Mark Harper.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the package of sanctions set out by the Prime Minister and the fact that he's confirmed more will come. If they are to be successful at punishing President Putin for what he has done to date and deterring him from going further and attacking our NATO partners, they must be sustained. And if they're to be sustained, we must be honest with the British people that there is going to be a cost for them. We are going to have to pay an economic cost, but it's a cost we must pay, and it pales in significance compared to the cost of the people of Ukraine.
Yes, and not only is that true, Mr. Speaker, but the opportunity and the reward for success and being strong is huge. Because if this should end, Mr. Speaker, with the rejection of aggression and the rejection of the Putin regime's view of the world, then that would be a massive, massive benefit, and an economic benefit as well to the whole world.
Chamberlain.
Mr. Speaker, up until May 2021, Valentina Yakovleva was my constituent. She resided in Scotland for 20 years with her daughter and her family. But due to an initial error in an application, she eventually exhausted appeals and was deported with 2 COVID jags last year. Now that 71-year-old is sheltering in a subway. In response to the Honourable Member for Central Ayrshire, who's no longer in her place, I would reiterate, does the Prime Minister agree with me that as we face a likely refugee crisis, the UK must be doing all it can to extract individuals who have immediate family relatives in the UK, and urge for support for this case?
Yes. Again, I thank her very much for drawing the case to my attention. If she sends me the details, I'll be happy to make sure it's properly taken up by the Home Office.
Can I just say, those who didn't get in, we have got a list for next time, because this will definitely not be the end. Okay, let people leave before I come to you, Chairman.
this House to now adjourn.
The question is this House to now adjourn. Wendy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We were told this week by the Prime Minister that the worst of COVID was over, and we are moving from responding to COVID as a crisis to something that we will be living with in the long term. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I hope, and I think that we all hope, that the Government's assessment is right, that after 2 long years of sacrifice, the worst is over. But this adjournment debate, granted before last week's recess, is also timely, because missing from the Prime Minister's statement on Monday was something very important, and that was how we deal with long COVID. In fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister didn't comment on long COVID at all. He talked about Omicron as being a less severe variant, and he said that COVID should now be treated like the flu. But this overlooks the fact that the debilitating symptoms of long COVID are not impacted by the severity of someone's initial COVID symptoms. You can have very mild COVID symptoms initially, but be left with an endless illness, stopping you from carrying out just the most basic activities. And that is one of the reasons why my party want everyone to continue to have access to free testing. The fight against COVID isn't over just because we want to appease backbenchers. But Mr. Speaker, it isn't really possible, Madam Deputy Speaker, it isn't really possible to describe long COVID. But doctors now think that it is caused by somebody having an ongoing immune response to COVID long after the virus has left their body. And what this looks like differs from person to person. There are 150 possible symptoms, with each person having a unique combination of these. The most commonly reported symptom is fatigue, then shortness of breath, loss of smell, difficulty concentrating and aching muscles. But symptoms can also include vertigo, fever, vomiting and diarrhoea, and those name just a few. Long COVID is also relapsing remitting, meaning that symptoms can come and go with very little warning. In short, it's complicated. But what we do know about long COVID is that it is impacting a vast amount of people. According to the Office for National Statistics, in the 4 weeks before the 2nd of January, 1.3 million people across the UK had long COVID. And considering the spread of Omicron didn't peak until 30th December, the actual number suffering today is likely to be higher. Tackling long COVID is a challenge, and one that we must take on as much as tackling COVID itself. I appreciate when I applied for this debate, I caused a little confusion. Why was a Scottish MP wanting to talk about a health condition when the care of our constituents is under the remit of the Scottish Government? And in some ways they are right. And it would be remiss of me not to pay tribute to the hard work of my friend, the member of the Scottish Parliament for Edinburgh West, who's been leading the way on getting health and social care support for long COVID sufferers in Scotland. And I know his current calls for proper care pathways, specialist clinics and support from trained district nurses will hugely benefit my constituents and others. But treatment, Madam Deputy Speaker, is only half the battle. The focus of this debate today is how long COVID affects someone's ability to work and what support they need as a result. Because if we are now living with COVID, we are now also living with long COVID. We've learned a lot about this disease in the past 2 years. There was so little understanding for those people who caught COVID in those very early days, and no understanding that their symptoms could last. But they have lasted, and for that first cohort of sufferers, they have lasted for nearly 2 years. At first, it might have been understandable to think that they just need to wait it out for their health to return to normal, but we cannot say that now. It would be completely disingenuous, for the symptoms are now the reality of their daily lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, I've already mentioned that there are over 150 symptoms associated with long COVID, and the medical profession is still starting to grapple with it, and most people don't understand it much at all. And sadly, a lack of understanding is causing, as it so often does, a stigma. A stigma which is all too well known by sufferers of other diseases such as ME. Like long COVID, fatigue is a common symptom of ME, and it too comes and goes. And when preparing for this debate, I spoke to representatives from Action for ME who have extensive experience with the problems facing those who describe fatigue as their primary symptom. And what they told me is that people with ME face a significant stigma, face being told that their illness doesn't exist, or that they should just learn to push through. They have also told me that they see the same narrative and the same problems being reported for hundreds of thousands who have severe fatigue as a result of long COVID. Indeed, Action for ME has had to close its helpline and its waiting list because it has seen such a surge in people contacting them, and I can't believe that that is not unrelated to long COVID. Madam Deputy Speaker, this leaves thousands of people suffering from an illness which may well make it hard for them to work, but where their colleagues and their employers do not necessarily believe that there is anything wrong with them? How do you explain an absence or ask for support in the face of being told that you are fabricating